President Volodymyr Zelensky says starting European Union membership negotiations this year is a top priority for Ukraine.
The United Nations says international humanitarian laws are being broken in Gaza, and its agencies warn water and fuel are running desperately low.
French President Emmanuel Macron says an international coalition fighting the Islamic State should widen its scope to include Hamas.
The European Commission proposes measures to avoid future pharmaceutical shortages after a series of stockouts last winter.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says starting membership talks with the European Union this year is a top priority for Kyiv. On Tuesday, he told EU commissioners that Ukraine was implementing 7 recommendations made by the Commission as quickly as possible.
Крок за кроком ми рухаємось до історичного досягнення у відносинах з Європою. Ми працюємо заради того, щоб вже цього року були відкриті переговори про членство України в ЄС. Мотивація – це теж зброя, і її також треба перезаряджати. Ми очікуємо цього потужного заряду для української мотивації. Готовності з боку ЄС розпочати переговори з Україною.
Meanwhile, demining operations continue on Ukraine's eastern front in its war with Russia. One of the explosives engineers lost a leg after stepping on a mine in the region of Kherson. But he and a fellow amputee says someone has to do the job. And firefighters have been working to extinguish a blaze in the Russian-held city of Donetsk. Its Moscow-backed mayor says the building was hit by Ukrainian shelling, killing one person and injuring another.
The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has alleged violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza and has urged an immediate ceasefire. He's warned against collective punishment of Palestinians. UN aid handouts still trickle in through Egypt, but its Agency for Palestine Refugees, the UNRWA, says some of the food can't be used because there's no water or power to cook it. It says the lack of fuel may force its own work to end tonight. The lack of fuel and water is also hitting hospitals. The World Health Organization says 12 out of 35 hospitals have stopped work altogether, and where they remain open, conditions are desperate.
The water pressure is so low, they are unable to operate the central sterilization machine that we use to sterilize our surgical equipment. And the electricity keeps cutting out, and we're completely dependent on the fuel, which I understand is no longer coming in.
The United States has told the UN Security Council it advocates humanitarian pauses to allow food, water and medicine in, not mentioning fuel. The US believes a ceasefire proposed by Russia and China would only help Hamas.
We want to see all measure of protection for civilians, and pauses in operation is a tool and a tactic that can do that for temporary periods of time. So does that is not the same as saying a ceasefire. Again, right now, we believe a ceasefire benefits Hamas, a general ceasefire.
Israeli airstrikes have intensified, killing more than 700 people in Gaza in the last day, according to the Hamas-run health ministry.
A warm welcome in Jerusalem for French President Emmanuel Macron. Speaking alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he suggested that an international coalition fighting Islamic State in Iraq and Syria could widen its scope to include Hamas. Macron then went on to Ramallah to meet with Mahmoud Abbas. The Palestinian Authority leader condemned what he described as the barbaric killings of civilians in Gaza.
إنما يجري اليوم من أحداث تتحمل إسرائيل مسؤوليتها كما تشاركها المسؤولية دول العالم التي شجعت سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على مواصلة تعميق ممارساتها العدوانية ضد الشعب الفلسطيني دون محاسبة أو عقاب.
Macron, who also called for a decisive relaunch of the Middle East peace process, was the latest in a string of Western leaders to voice support for Israel. As concern mounts that the escalating conflict will spread across the region, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned Iran to avoid attacks that would widen the war. And US President Joe Biden spoke to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to discuss ongoing diplomatic and military efforts to prevent the widening of the conflict.
Palestinians fleeing the bombing of Gaza have sought refuge in different places. Most have moved south, others have taken shelter in hospitals or UN schools. But some have gone to the home of an Irish Palestinian citizen, believing that he, as a foreign national, will not be targeted. Euronews correspondent Nebal Hadjo spoke to some of them and their host.
بطل الواحد يعرف من وين ايش يعمل. كل الابراج صارت تطلع، كل الناس تطلع، وين رايحين؟ شاردين على ورا الواد زي ما قالوا اليهود، ورا الواد. فاحنا طلعنا واحنا خايفين واحنا ملموسين، يعني لا اخذنا اواعينا ولا سبنا الدور وسبنا الفراش وسبنا الاكل على النار وطلعنا. وبالغصب لما لقينا سياره توصلنا ايش لما بعد الواد زي ما بيقولوا يعني هم.
اول يومين كان صعب علينا كثير كتقبل بعض. يعني قعدنا يمكن يومين نفس المجموعه هذه ما بنحكي مع بعض، كل واحد كان معصب، ما حدش طايق الثاني. بعديها لما حسينا انه لازم نندمج مع بعض وننخرط، بدات الافكار تتقارب مع بعض، بدات تطلع الافكار. صار الشخص المسؤول او الشخص الكبير في السن الاكثر حكمه اقترح انه لازم نعمل مثلا صندوق كل شخص 30 شيكل، فوق السنويه لازم 30 شيكل، تحت السنويه 15، لانه اكله اقل بيصير.
Ibrahim Al-Aga had only planned a short visit, but has been trapped by the war. He felt a duty to open his doors to dozens of displaced Gazans.
It's me, my wife and my 3 children. We came to Gaza. Unfortunately, we got trapped here. Situation is very difficult, so as you can see, we are hosting a lot of friends and relatives. We have a big problem. Maybe you saw our struggle with food, water, electricity, trying to entertain the kids as well. So it's daily struggle. It's from the morning till we go to sleep. It's daily struggle just to source our needs here as a group.
Spain's socialist and hard-left Sumar parties have agreed to form a coalition government. The deal includes social measures, such as a commitment to reduce working hours without lowering salaries. But the potential coalition is not enough to guarantee another term for incumbent socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. It still needs the backing of other parties in parliament. Spain has been in political limbo since the July snap election that saw the Conservative Popular Party finish first, but without enough votes to form a government. Paris is pressing ahead with plans to stop people selling things on the street in time for the 2024 Olympics to be held in the city. Police officials say they will completely eradicate what they described as street vending, fortune-telling and other delinquent activities. The authorities also plan to clean up the streets from May and reinforce security. And bookstores along the Seine River will be removed for security reasons, with booksellers denouncing the decision amid concerns that the old structures will be damaged in the move.
A new study shows that thousands of patients in England have persistent COVID symptoms more than a year after infection. Researchers at Imperial College London collected information from over 3 million people and went back to 250,000. From the sample, persistent symptoms were experienced for 12 weeks by 7.5% and for more than a year by 5%. Between 10 and 30% of people are estimated to have experienced some form of long COVID, the causes of which are unknown.
As winter approaches, European pharmacies are once again facing drug shortages. Every day, pharmacists in Brussels move heaven and earth to find a solution for patients.
Tous les jours, on est obligé de faire des recherches pour essayer d'assurer le suivi des traitements des patients. On essaie quand même de trouver des alternatives quand il y en a, on essaie de se dépanner entre collègues si c'est possible, et vraiment dans les cas les plus compliqués, ben oui, là on doit dire non, on doit renvoyer vers le médecin pour qu'il change éventuellement le traitement si c'est nécessaire.
Last year, France's Medicines Safety Agency recorded over 3,700 reports of stockouts or risks of stockouts. Pressed by member states, the European Commission on Tuesday presented a series of measures to avoid future shortages. It's proposing the immediate launch of a voluntary European solidarity mechanism for medicines.
For this winter, we're immediately setting up a new voluntary solidarity mechanism. This will enable any member state facing shortages to seek support from other member states who may be able to share medicines if they have a sufficient supply.
The Commission also intends to draw up a list of critical medicines by the end of the year. It's a document that consumer protection organisations consider particularly important.
It will be a useful tool because it will it should include also medicines that meet priority healthcare needs, and it will facilitate that then the authorities can focus a bit more on these medicines, can analyze the supply chain, can identify vulnerabilities, can introduce measures to tackle those vulnerabilities, and also the idea is to have a bit more cooperation and reinforce cooperation on these critical medicines, and all these are measures that we value positively.
In the long term, the Commission proposes to diversify its global supply chains through international partnerships with third countries. Finally, it also wants to strengthen production capacities in the manufacturing of critical drugs and active ingredients. However, it's being careful not to talk about the re-industrialisation of the sector on the continent.